It's a dramatic day for the neighborhood. The world woke up to the announcement by the American president that the Al Qaeda chief, the successor to Osama bin Laden Al-Zawahiri, has been taken out in a US strike. I'm Barkhadat, you're with the Mojo story. This is what we know about this developing story at this hour. The man who is the successor to Osama bin Laden is dead. Al-Zawahiri, for years believed to be hiding in Pakistan, was taken out in a drone strike from his safe house in Kabul. The New York Times suggested that this is a safe house that was owned by an aide close to Sirajuddin Haqqani, the terrorist who is now the interior minister of Afghanistan. Amid these developments comes fevered speculation as to whether Pakistan quite literally offered up Zawahiri in return for financial aid that it is desperately seeking from the United States of America. Remember, the Pakistan Army Chief, General Bajwa, only recently reached out directly to the Americans, creating a political furor in his own country. So, a lot to unpack here. This is also a day when America's Nancy Pelosi is headed to Taiwan, and we have to see how China may react to that development. Indeed, as we look at China's reaction to what has happened in Afghanistan as well. Let's introduce our panel of experts on the program today. Joining us first up is Ahmad Shuja Jamal. He's a former security official with the government of Afghanistan and the author of a forthcoming book that looks at the decline of Republican Afghanistan, the rise and the decline of Republican Afghanistan. Welcome to the program, Shuja. We're also joined by Dr. Ayesha Siddiqa, who is a foremost analyst from Pakistan, a professor at King's College in London. Welcome, Ayesha. Always great to see you. Ambassador Vivek Katju, veteran diplomat, is with us. General Atta Hasnain, security analyst, former general officer commanding in the Kashmir Valley, is with us. And finally, Dr. Christine Fair from Georgetown, presently on a trip to India in Chandigarh. Thank you very much. A great panel. And before I get started with all of you, let's just listen in to what Joe Biden had to say when he made this announcement.
My fellow Americans, on Saturday, at my direction, the United States successfully concluded an airstrike in Kabul, Afghanistan, that killed the emir of Al Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri. Zawahiri was bin Laden's leader. He was with him the whole time. He was his number two man, his deputy at the time the terrorist attack 9/11. He was deeply involved in the planning of 9/11. One of the most responsible for the attacks that murdered 2,977 people on American soil.
And basically, Biden then said, well, however long it takes us, we'll come and get you. But what has really gone on here behind the scenes? That's what we have to understand. And let me start with Shuja, who, as I said, has been a security official in the National Security Council of erstwhile Republican Afghanistan. Shuja, let me start with your thoughts.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Barka. I think what's really glaring is that this is not the first, but the second high-level number one Al-Qaeda official who is being killed by the U.S. in this region with associations to the Pakistani state and nation. I think what is relevant here is that the Taliban have an interior minister who is an FBI most wanted with very close connections with the Pakistani government. And that FBI most wanted terrorist actually housed the world number one wanted terrorist, who was Ayman al-Zawahiri, and the Americans got to them. What that means is that responsible regimes keep the company of respectable people. Terrorist regimes keep the company of terrorists. And so what we've done today is that the Americans, in striking that deal with the Taliban in Doha in February of 2020, have struck a deal with the devil, and they're beginning to realize that if they hadn't done that in the past. And so it also, I think, brings to crystal clear focus as to why the sanctions on the Afghan economy continue, and that is because the Taliban, number one, elevate FBI most wanted terrorists to the status of a minister of economy, who then elevate their friends as honored guests in a capital where the people are starving, but this honored international terrorist guest has a king's welcome and a villa where he can live with his family. And so the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and their connections with Al-Qaeda are liabilities on the Afghan people. There are liabilities on the Afghan economy. And today is really a stark reminder of why those sanctions continue to be imposed on the Afghan banking sector, which has stifled economic growth and precipitated a downward spiral.
Shuja, let me ask you this. There is a lot of curiosity about the timing. The fact that this has happened days after Pakistan's army chief reached out to the Americans. There's an economic crisis in Pakistan. It desperately needs financial aid. Could this have happened? And you speak, of course, as someone who has been in Afghanistan's National Security Council. Could this have happened without Pakistani collaboration? And if not, why would the Pakistanis collaborate? The New York Times reports that Zawahiri was taken out in a house belonging to an aide of Sirajuddin Haqqani, known in the past for his links to the ISI, today the Interior Minister of Afghanistan.
Look, I was involved in secret back-channel British broker negotiations between high-level Afghan officials and high-level Pakistani security officials, including Faiz Hamid, the former DG of ISI, and the Chief of Army Staff from Pakistan. And it took us many rounds of secret negotiations even to begin to have the Pakistanis to commit to any form of even rudimentary security cooperation in helping us tackle the menace that was Taliban. And this was between November of 2020 up until about July of 2021, so approximately 7, 8, 9 months. And so we struggled, even though it was facilitated by the British, to gain any security cooperation. Pakistan and its economy and its security conditions and its own political instability has only gotten worse. So it stands to reason that when a country facing security, economic, and political turmoil, the army chief would actually go hat in hand to the US as opposed to civilian officials. So it stands to reason that there is pain being felt within all levels of Pakistan. But it's also, I think, possible that the Americans did this on their own, because if you think about it, this is actually a villa that's a stone's throw away from what used to be the American embassy, and a stone's throw away from what used to be the CIA annex in this area. So the Americans, under no inch by inch this territory, they surveilled this area pretty intensively when they were there, and I can imagine that they still maintain some assets. And so I think while the theory that the Pakistanis might have given this up stands to reason, but it's also plausible, I think, that the Americans did this on their own. But it is important to realize that the city develops, it grows, the people move, the geographic and the actual urban terrain changes. And so how long the CIA will be able to maintain the same level of surveillance is really up for debate.
Okay, before I come to Ambassador Katju, General Hasnain, and Dr. Christine Fair, I must go to Dr. Ayesha Siddiqa, who has long studied the Pakistan military. And Ayesha, you were furious. I was following your comments when General Bajwa, Pakistan's army chief, reached out directly to the Americans. You made the argument that he had no business to do that. That was the job of the civilian government. I want to ask you if you join any dots between that development and this, as is being commented on, or whether you stay with Shuja's comments that it's hard to know at this point. How do you see what's happened with Zawahiri, who, of course, has been in Pakistan till recently? We can't put an exact date on it. And in fact, the Americans have been able to do this since he moved from Pakistan into Afghanistan. Your comments, Dr. Siddiqa.
Yeah, Barka, let me just remind you that till 2019, in fact, Zawahiri's family, his wife and children, were in Pakistan, and they were released in 2019. We don't know under what circumstances, what was the swap like, but 2019 they were sent to Afghanistan. So Pakistan definitely did know about Zawahiri, and in fact, you know, the story which continues to play in Pakistan-US relations, and we've you know, you've heard about it. The region has heard about it. The world has heard about it. You know, this the gripe of Imran Khan government when it was in power, that Biden doesn't make a phone call. And one begins to understand why Biden wouldn't make a phone call. It's because he was suspicious. He wanted Pakistan to do more, and Pakistan was not doing more despite the agreement, despite that, they'd promised to cooperate and the rest of it. Now, let me join, in fact, not just one dot, but two dots. That the earlier operation of to take out Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad in 2011, even there is a strong suspicion that somebody very high up, in the military administration knew about and cooperated. It's not just the man who got the money, the brigadier. The army brigadier who actually went to United States, who gave the information, who's now living comfortably in California. It was more than just one person. There were other people high up involved. The Air Force, the army chief, then, there was that finger pointed. Now, of course, Shuja knows his city more than I do. Kabul is his city, not mine. But I still believe that for this kind of an operation, I mean, it was a very specific, targeted operation. There was this man standing on the balcony. So, a drone technology, of course, they use the drone technology. And you have to be, the drone has to be loitering in the air for quite a long time. So, we also keep hearing about American capability, or the OTH capability, but
Yeah.
across the horizon capability. But for this kind of a specific operation, they did need to use Pakistani airspace. So if there is any mild kind of cooperation, it is that. And I wouldn't be surprised that Pakistan at some level did cooperate. Um,
Yeah.
Again, linking these two stories, if there was cooperation in Osama bin Laden's case, in that operation, then definitely that was a point in time when Pakistan was ready to negotiate bin Laden in return for something. The same thing has happened now. Pakistan, its military in particular, is pretty desperate, and I wouldn't count that out, that possibility that they
So
cooperated.
lots of wheels within wheels, Ambassador Karju. Can you unpack some of these and disentangle some of these threads for us?
The thoughts that have been coming to me are these. One, that obviously there was human intelligence within Kabul. Uh, Two, that it is strange that the that whichever faction of the Taliban decided to house Zawahiri would have done it in Sherpur. Because I'm a little familiar with Kabul, having lived there. Now, Kabul has evolved in the last 2 decades, but Sherpur is right in the center of the city. It is within a stone's throw of prominent government installations, including the foreign ministry, the diplomatic enclave, the ARG is not too far. So why should someone have housed him where he did? That is the question which has perplexed me. Was it because of a certainty that because he was there, the Americans wouldn't have the quote unquote courage to cause large scale devastation because the diplomatic quarter is right close by to target someone there? But that's a question mark. Third, I agree with Dr. Siddiqa that some kind of Pakistani complicity would have been there. But the more interesting question to me is what it shows about fractures within the Taliban, because this will set off a train of events, or may set off a train of events within the Taliban with consequences that are unclear as yet. So, to that extent, for Afghanistan itself, it has the potential of being a very significant development. Uh, Beyond that, my own experience is that that such events are shrouded in such wheels within wheels that it's impossible to disentangle them within a few hours of an announcement
Do you fear do you fear and that Pakistan and the United States will get closer after this episode?
Look, these things are very temporary. Uh, the Americans have an interest as international as all the major powers have an interest in the stability of Pakistan. I've always believed that Pakistan will be kept on a drip. No one wants Pakistan to go down the Somalia way. Can anyone afford a nuclear Somalia? That's the bottom line.
Well, let me take that right away to Dr. Christine Fair and then General Hasnain. Christine, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure what more there is to add. There's been considerable amount of speculation, and of course, what we don't really have is genuine information. So with an operation like this, the issue isn't just the drone and the munition on the drone. It is the flight path of the drone. We don't know from which country the drone was based. Given the specificity of the attack, it certainly implies that there had to be an on-the-ground spotter, someone who was actually, what they say, lighting up the target set so that the munition could more easily make contact with the target. And if you look at the available flight paths for that drone, and you couple it with the most likely source of intelligence, Pakistan obviously emerges as the most likely facilitator of this attack. What I find really interesting, and I'm actually glad that Ayesha raised it, because for me, this caused me to go back considerably and rethink the Osama bin Laden raid in Abbottabad. So, Ambassador Katju raised a question about the commonsensical nature of hiding him in plain sight. But when I actually look at these Al-Qaeda fellows who have been captured, they do seem to have one commonality. They're hidden in plain sight. Why did Mullah Omar in the first place want Osama bin Laden to be housed with the Taliban? It was so that he could keep an eye on him. If you are the Taliban regime in Kabul, you don't want this guy off somewhere where your assets aren't able to keep a close eye on him. So, when you kind of go through and you lay out the possible scenarios, we don't believe that the Taliban would have facilitated this attack, given that they were facilitating horror. I rule out the possibility of factions within the Taliban. For me, the most commonsensical explanation is that the Pakistan military wants to try to revivify its salience for the U.S. government. What Pakistan has always done when it's been in dire straits is to remind the Americans of how important they are. And they've essentially arbitraged importance for financial aid. So to me, that makes the most, at this point, absent real information, which, let's be really clear, none of us have. We don't know where the drone was based. We don't know what its flight path was. And we don't really know the source of the intelligence that outed him. But for my money, I'm going with the Pakistan route because it makes the most sense.
Yeah. Usually they say what appears to be, evident and commonsensical is the most evident. Before I come to Ambassador Katju, let me bring in General Hasnain. General Hasnain, go ahead.
See, Banka, this operation has taken the better part of the last couple of months to put together. And obviously the intelligence buildup has been over the last 10 years, perhaps. Lots of things have been observed. A stature of this kind, as far as intelligence operations are concerned, obviously has got the highest place in the entire structure of the United States intelligence. Now, in a case such as that, to trust the Pakistanis is something which I suspect. It's not easy to trust anyone in this kind of a situation. You would want to play this very close to your chest. And just the simplest leakage of an innocuous piece of information can upset the entire thing and put it off for 10 years more. This is not what the Americans would have wanted. So to my mind, first of all, I think the Al-Qaeda got overconfident, right? It happens. It always happens. The moment the Americans went away from Kabul, the moment they left Afghanistan, they felt everything was hunky-dory now. The Taliban was fully in control. I'm sure somewhere a glitch in terms of the understanding of security went in there. The trust deficit could not have allowed the Americans to depend on Pakistan to the kind of extent that they would want to. But yes, definitely some kind of a tacit agreement as far as overflight is concerned over Pakistani territory, particularly over Balochistan, would have been possible, although I think even that is not required, because an active air defense would take fairly long to be able to pick up and respond to a drone which is flying over Pakistani territory and entering into Afghanistan. So having said that, I'm not sure that the Pakistanis are absolutely involved, but somewhere a tacit understanding has definitely taken place between them.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Okay, no, I just, Ambassador Katju, you wanted to come in briefly. I want to go back to Shuja with a number of questions that have been raised by the first round of comments. Go ahead.
No, I entirely agree with Dr. Fair that there is a tendency to hide assets in plain sight as far as the Taliban is concerned. But my little knowledge, and here, of course, Shuja can correct me, my little knowledge of Sherpur and these new villas that are being constructed are that they are unlike the structures that are there in the Afghan rural landscape, and certainly where Osama was housed. This is like a large villa. And in a large villa where people can going around in the middle of a city, where people can go around gaining an understanding of who is in, that is what has really intrigued.
Okay, let's bring in Shuja now. Shuja, a lot of questions here, a lot of I suppose conspiracy theories. Dr. Fair reminds us nobody really knows, but having been on the insides of how sort of the security concerns of Afghanistan are managed, what would be your best understanding of what's actually gone down here?
I think Dr. Fair makes an important point about us lacking the sufficient requisite information to make anything but an educated guess. And I think the panelists have sort of commented as to that in sufficient detail. But I would also like to remind everybody that in 2020, Afghanistan also took out the head of Al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent, AQIS, in Helmand, and he was also housed in a very large compound with his entire family in a place that was actually very, very much under Taliban control, and that the government or even the international forces did not have any ground reach there except for a descent from aerial assets. And so this is consistent with the Taliban modus operandi. What we are hearing also is that a major Taliban official who runs a madrasa across the Afghan border inside of Chaman with about 600 students was also killed in this airstrike, because the chatter within Taliban WhatsApp groups indicate that photos of him are shared. And there is chatter. Also, immediately after the airstrike was conducted on this house, the entire area was cordoned off. People could not approach the area. And so I'd be very curious at the President Biden's allusion to CIA ground assets having been able to confirm the identity on the ground. So we know that as soon as this happened, the entire area was cordoned off. And I can assure you that not even many of the Taliban officials themselves had access across that cordon in that area. So so there are still details that need to be fleshed out.
Dr. Fair, do you want to come in on that point about the allusion to the CIA ground assets?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be. I don't know how else they could have confirmed his demise without the presence of ground assets. And I had suggested as much with the strong possibility that there would have had to have been a ground spotter. So I'm fairly confident that there were on the ground assets, which kind of, when people talk about these technologies as being over the horizon, they really forget that for the drone weapon system to be effective, it requires on-the-ground assets. So people have made a lot of fuss over where drones can be based. That's just one part of the problem. It's not where drones can be based that make these things effective. It's how can we retain the assets that we have on the ground, and where are these assets residing in places that are safe. These raise, from my point of view, the more interesting questions about relations, the questions that are not necessarily being asked by most journalists. For those assets to have remained on the ground and to have safely exfiltrated, this implies a relationship with Pakistan. We can virtually rule out Central Asia and the Central Asian republics because of their very strong relationship with Russia and the nature of Russia and U.S. ties. So when you eliminate out all of the impossibilities, Pakistan remains the most likely explanatory variable for how much of this attack took place.
Dr. Siddiqa, let me bring you in now. In Pakistan, already caught in a kind of moment of domestic turmoil, political turmoil, and as you have argued on this very program, a kind of military versus military shadow boxing over who should be the next prime minister, who should lead the civilian government. How does this development impact that jousting that is going on behind the scenes?
You know, Barkha, it's so interesting that I was looking at, media reports, following all of that. What was the discussion? And it's so interesting that while the international community is concerned about what has happened, I mean, it's an interesting and important development. Doesn't mean it's end of Al Qaeda, but or terrorism in general. But it's still a very significant step forward as far as counterterrorism is concerned. But there is so little debate in Pakistan at the moment. I mean, there is a very kind of a what I call strategic silence, which has happened. Pakistan does not want people, it's even including its media, civilian media, to be talking too much about what has happened, ask questions about what are the possibilities of who was. And let me very quickly I beg to differ with General Hasnain, who thinks that Pakistan couldn't have been involved, or how Americans could have trusted Pakistan. It's not a strategic trust; it's a tactical trust. It happens in a very small bubble. It can happen. It has happened before. When in the Bin Laden attack, it has probably happened again. So in Pakistan, but going back, there is a lot of silence at the moment on this issue, as if nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to expose more that what needs to be said. Um, Looking at the debate of who's doing what, I think what comes back, what one can derive from the story, and this is something which General Bajwa, for example, has been doing very well. He has a few people, definitely, in few countries, definitely the UK. In UK, there is a great faith in General Bajwa's capacity to actually be on the uh, keep Pakistan on the path of being part of the American security constellation rather than shifting away towards China. So there is this China versus United States lobby within the Pakistani security establishment, and I think that right now a lot of toing and froing would be going on between that as well. And whether Bajwa gets an extension, I mean, that book is not shut at the moment. That
It's
chapter is still
fascinating.
open.
And I have to
know.
thank you for
Yeah.
reminding us about China, because General Hasnain, while you may want to respond to what Dr. Siddiqa has said, it's worth reminding our audience that today is also the day that Nancy Pelosi is headed to Taiwan. We don't know how China is actually going to react to that. We've had a kind of meaty mouth response from China on what's happened in Afghanistan. So let me bring you in, General Hasnain, on that and what Ayesha has said.
Firstly, on what Ayesha said, well, I don't disagree with what Ayesha has commented. Well, I do believe, yes, in my experience of watching and observing the linkages between the Pakistan Army and the United States Armed Forces, I dare say, yes, there is a very good understanding and a very good relationship. But my only thing is that when you see the gravity of an operation, something which the United States has been waiting for the last 20 years, I, as a president, as the commander in chief of the forces of the United States, wouldn't trust anybody, just nobody on it. But as she said, tactical understanding is possible. Maybe there is some kind of a very deep rapport between within the intelligence agencies, where this kind of a thing, exchange, could have taken place.
But you're not convinced. You're not
I'm
convinced.
not completely convinced. But I still believe that, you see, when you are waiting 20 years, you waited for this. 10 years after Osama bin Laden has been killed, 11 years in fact, you've been waiting for this. You also got to remember Joe Biden, and look at the political side of it. Joe Biden's approval ratings today, what they are, with the upcoming Senate elections in the month of December. Imagine this is the opportunity that the Democrats have been looking for which Biden has been looking for. Would he want to just squander it somewhere for the sake of a tactical alliance with Pakistan? I don't think so. I think 20 years in Kabul, they've got their assets.
But General Hasnain, he botched up the withdrawal from Afghanistan so badly, he had a set of limited options. I mean, I don't think Biden has a whole sort of array.
My only contention is 20 years, when a military has been in a city for 20 years, it would have developed generations of contacts sufficient on the ground to be able to respond to a situation such as this. I think it's purely that.
Okay, I'm seeing many responses to what you've said. Christine and Ayesha clearly disagreeing, but I need to start taking last comments. Ambassador Katju, I'll start with you, then I'll come to both Christine, Ayesha, and Shuja. Go ahead, Ambassador Katju.
Look, it doesn't. I think the Pakistanis would have been involved in some manner or form. It does not have to be a detailed kind of discussion. In this game, as all of us know, a wink and a nod is sufficient. And thereafter, the whole operation is developed by the Americans themselves. So, to that extent, I think the Pakistanis would have been involved. And I don't, while I have great respect for Dr. Fair, and if I heard her correctly, I don't believe that the Taliban are a cohesive unit. We know the contradictions between the Taliban. And we also know that the Mashriqi boys are in control of Kabul, and that this is not to the liking of many of the Kandhari fellows. So there are contradictions, and what can be better to put them all on the surface than an attack like this? So therefore, as we all acknowledge, there is a paucity of authentic information. We all are trying to find ways. And my last point is this. I of course consider Dr. Siddiqa to be perhaps the world's foremost scholar on the Pakistan army, and I'll always defer to her. But I believe that Bajwa cannot continue beyond the 29th of November, that his own generals and his own officer corps will not accept that.
Okay.
As it is, he is unpopular, and that will be a very difficult task for him. And now, Barka, if you excuse me, I've got to go.
Yes,
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, sir. We let you go early, but we're going to take your comments to both Christine and Ayesha, who had strong disagreements with what General Hasnain was also saying. Christine, I'll start with you. Thanks, Ambassador. Leave when you need to. Christine, I'll go to you. Yeah, Christine.
Yeah, sorry, my voice is weak because I have COVID. So my point wasn't that they're not.
Get well soon.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
We all have it, right, at one point or another. My point isn't that there were not disagreements with the Taliban. I am saying that that's not what's going on here. We cannot make the parallel between this raid and what happened with Osama bin Laden. I mean, if we go back and look at how the Osama bin Laden raid happened, we had Hussein Haqqani, God bless him, issuing visas to every array of special operators. That was done through hard grit of American operatives on the ground in Pakistan, working with their Pakistani counterparts. The erasure of the Pakistani assets in the bin Laden raid is something with which I have a general displeasure, because without them, this would not have happened. After August 2021, we don't have that kind of intelligence presence in Afghanistan. It is my strong belief that this raid could not have happened in an analogous manner to the Osama Bin Laden raid, because we didn't have those assets in Kabul. The most likely, again, I go with the simplest explanation is most likely the explanation that's germane. Pakistan is desperate, right? Particularly after the Imran Khan fiasco, the Pakistan army has been trying to recuperate its image and its salience with the Americans. Offering this bone to the Americans, especially at a time when we have midterm elections coming up, is a pretty strong explanation for how this could have come about, rather than positing what General Hasnain was suggesting. We don't have those assets there, right? So these assets had to have been expeditionary, right? So I think we're all just sort of speculating.
Sure, but let me take your point and General Hasnain's point. And by the way, Shuja's reminded us of a really important point, that after this is all said and done, you still need the cooperation of the Taliban for any counter ops and maintaining the security status going on. So how does that go forward? But the second point,
so you actually don't, Barka.
Why?
You don't.
Why?
That's the whole point of expeditionary assets, right? What you really needed. First of all, the Taliban do not have anti-air assets, right? And for this drone to be effective, it had to have been flying at a much higher altitude so that it wasn't audible. So again, the tribal areas, people sometimes talk about the drones coming down to lower altitudes where they're audible. This drone had to have been at 30,000 feet. There's no way the Taliban would have detected that drone and taken it out. What was necessary, right, was access to airspace. So while we're all speculating, it seems to me the most plausible explanation here is that Pakistan's trying to recuperate itself with the United States. And for me, this raises a much more interesting question. Why is Zawahiri all of a sudden expendable to any of these actors, right? Because no matter which of us is right in our hypothesis, the real question is, why did Al-Zawahiri all of a sudden become expendable? No one's really raised this.
That's a great question. And can I bring in Shuja, and then I'll come to Ayesha and give General Hasnain the last word. Shuja, I don't think you were talking about the dependency necessarily on the Taliban for this operation, but going forward. And you also reminded us about the very tentative outreach by India. And I think we should spend a couple of minutes on how all of this impacts that. But go ahead, Shuja.
Thank you for bringing up this really important question. The entire US Taliban deal struck in Doha was premised on the ability, on this idea that the Taliban actually would honor their word about not harboring Al-Qaeda and severing ties with Al-Qaeda, so that whatever concerns there are left in the US politically and in the security circles about any attacks emanating from Afghanistan would be ameliorated. What we have seen, regardless of whether the Pakistanis had this level of cooperation or that level of cooperation, regardless of whether which faction of the Taliban thought that Zawahiri was expendable, regardless of all of those are important issues. But I think at the bottom end of all of this is that you cannot rely on the Taliban for any kind of security cooperation. You cannot rely on them to be responsible actors, to actually even follow the words of the agreement that they struck in front of the eyes of the world in Doha. There are plenty of countries at this moment who actually think that by allowing the Taliban to remain in power in Afghanistan, they are allowing for a cover of governance in space that otherwise would be ungoverned. And I think that kind of a very basic dependency on the Taliban to govern an otherwise ungoverned space also gives the Taliban the flexibility, the space, and the tranquility to actually harbor other high-value terrorists like Ayman al-Zawahiri. And so what that is not only is the countenancing of the Taliban as a de facto authority in Afghanistan, highly dangerous to the rights and achievements of the Afghan people, but also extremely pernicious to the security of the region and beyond. And I think the Indian outreach to the Taliban, tentative as it may have been, have come up into the public. You've shown the images, which means that there seems to be an increase in the initial tentative, behind the scene kind of denying, not really denying, but now it's undeniable and it's increasing. And I think you can raise a snake as your child and love it, but the nature of a snake will always be to bite somebody, and it could bite you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And General Hasnain, I'll bring you in and actually ask Ayesha to maybe close for us, because the Indian outreach has been mentioned. And I just want to remind our audience that Zawahiri very recently, I think in April, made an India-specific video where he was commenting on the entire debate over the hijab and schoolgirls in Karnataka. So, apart from the sort of larger jihadist rhetoric when it comes to the Kashmir Valley, there's also been that. And I think Shuja raises an interesting point about the tentative Indian outreach that had just begun taking shape. Is any of that going to change with these developments? Let's also remind everybody that a UN report reminds the world that Taliban continues to offer safe havens to Al-Qaeda. So how are all of those debates going to change now?
See, Barka, it's not just the Al-Qaeda. And it may not be safe havens, but yes, on their own, northern Afghanistan is virtually the center of gravity to which most of these desperate terrorist groups have gravitated. The IS is there. We've got Pakistani-based groups which have all gone there. So that is the area where they're all being not really hosted, but they are there at the moment. I think to stave off the possibility of any of these groups getting together, targeting, obviously they would be looking at enhancing their outreach, carrying out certain actions in the subcontinent itself. I think what India has been doing is essentially reaching out. These are feelers. This is more, probing than anything else. And I think Ambassador Katju has left, of course, but he was probably one of the first people who spoke about this almost a year ago and kept saying it that there is no other option
and actually got emotionally criticized by many people who said, "How can we be talking to the Taliban?" Well, there are those, and there are those images. But Shuja does remind us that this is that mythology of the Taliban occupying this sort of vacuum, that a vacuum is, anything is better than a vacuum. That's also been called out today. Dr. Ayesha Siddiqa, I'll give you the last word. General, sorry, were you trying to say something? You were about to, just one sentence? Yeah.
No, none of this is cemented as such. There is nothing cast in iron here. This is a typical situation which is emerging in a post-war environment in which there are feelers all around. I don't think this particular incident is really going to change too many things. Obviously, everyone will reconsider, review, but I think more or less the Indian stance will probably continue the way it is.
Okay, I have to close. Dr. Siddiqa, the last word.
Yeah. Again, I would draw your attention towards the very important point which Christine Fair raised, which is that why did Zawahiri become expendable for all the actors involved? Pakistan, the Taliban, important question. And I think it also raises, attention towards need to attend to the dire need of the Taliban themselves. One, that there is a schism with, the different groupings within the Taliban. The second is that Taliban themselves are they're eager to get resources from the international community. Now, as far as Pakistan is concerned, I think what is very clear is that what Pakistan may get in return, if there has been indeed some form of cooperation, is petty small cash. It's not going to be a very strategic change in US-Pakistan relations. That's one. The question we didn't get answered, which is China, how would China react? I think China would be happy. It's not that China will be unhappy by Zawahiri, getting taken out. I think what is important is it's a signal from the United States that it is watching, that United States is physically out of Afghanistan, but it still has the capacity to operate in Afghanistan. That's an important signal for other countries, other players in the region, other players in operating in Afghanistan, and definitely for the Taliban.
Yeah, I think that is actually a critical point. And even if those those CIA ground assets could not have been cultivated without Pakistan and the airspace of Pakistan, those 2 points that we've heard repeatedly made, it's the Americans trying to say to the Taliban, we're still around. I don't know how effective that is going to be in sort of this region's battle against terrorism. Bottom line remains elusive, but we'll say thank you to all of you. Learned a lot, General Hasnain, Dr. Fair, Dr. Siddiqa, and in particular to Ahmad, Shuja. We are glad that you are safe outside of Afghanistan, and we look forward to your forthcoming book, The Decline and Fall of Republican Afghanistan. Let us also remember that there was such a thing while we look at Zawahiri being taken out today. Thank you, and see you, everyone. Take care. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.